Muslim armies advancing from Arabia conquered Syria, Palestine, Egypt, and North Africa, all until then part of Christendom, and most of the new recruits to Islam, west of Iran and Arabia, were indeed converts from Christianity. In the 8th century, from their bases in North Africa, Arab Muslim forces, now joined by Berber converts, conquered Spain and Portugal and invaded France. In the 9th century, they conquered Sicily and invaded the Italian mainland. In 846 of the Common Era, a naval expedition from Sicily even entered the river Tiber, and Arab forces sacked Ostia and Rome. This provoked the first attempt to organize an effective Christian counterattack. A subsequent series of campaigns to recover the Holy Land, known as the Crusades, ended in failure and expulsion. In Europe, Christian arms were more successful. By the end of the 11th century, the Muslims had been expelled from Sicily, and in 1492, almost 8 centuries after the first Muslim landing in Spain, the long struggle for the reconquest ended in victory, opening the way to a Christian invasion of Africa and Asia. But meanwhile, there were other Muslim threats to European Christendom. In the East, between 1237 and 1240 of the Common Era, the Tatars of the Golden Horde conquered Russia. In 1252, the Khan of the Golden Horde and his people were converted to Islam. Russia, with much of Eastern Europe, was subject to Muslim rule, and it was not until the late 15th century that the Russians finally freed their country from what they called the Tatar yoke. In the meantime, a third wave of Muslim attack had begun, that of the Ottoman Turks, who conquered Anatolia, captured the ancient Christian city of Constantinople, invaded and colonized the Balkan Peninsula, and threatened the very heart of Europe, twice reaching as far as Vienna. At the peak of Islamic power, there was only one civilization that was comparable in the level, quality, and variety of achievement. That was, of course, China. But Chinese civilization remained essentially local, limited to one region, East Asia, and to one racial group. It was exported to some degree, but only to neighboring and kindred peoples. Islam, in contrast, created a world civilization, polyethnic, multiracial, international, one might even say intercontinental. For centuries, the world-view and self-view of Muslims seemed well-grounded. Islam represented the greatest military power on earth. Its armies, at the very same time, were invading Europe and Africa, India and China. It was the foremost economic power in the world, trading in a wide range of commodities through a far-flung network of commerce and communications in Asia, Europe and Africa, importing slaves and gold from Africa, slaves and wool from Europe, and exchanging a variety of foodstuffs, materials, and manufactures with the civilized countries of Asia. It had achieved the highest level so far in human history in the arts and sciences of civilization. Inheriting the knowledge and skills of the ancient Middle East, of Greece and of Persia, it added to them new and important innovations from outside, such as the use and manufacture of paper from China, and decimal positional numbering from India. It is difficult to imagine modern literature or science without the one or the other. It was in the Islamic Middle East that Indian numbers were for the first time incorporated in the inherited body of mathematical learning. From the Middle East, they were transmitted to the West, where they are still known as Arabic numerals, honoring not those who invented them, but those who first brought them to Europe. To this rich inheritance, scholars and scientists in the Islamic world added an immensely important contribution through their own observations, experiments, and ideas. In most of the arts and sciences of civilization, medieval Europe was a pupil, and in a sense a dependent of the Islamic world, relying on Arabic versions even for many otherwise unknown Greek works. And then, suddenly, the relationship changed. Even before the Renaissance, Europeans were beginning to make significant progress in the civilized arts. With the advent of the new learning, they advanced by leaps and bounds, leaving the scientific and technological and eventually the cultural heritage of the Islamic world far behind them. The Muslims, for a long time, remained unaware of this. The great translation movement that centuries earlier had brought many Greek, Persian, and Syriac works within the purview of Muslim and other Arabic readers had come to an end, and the new scientific literature of Europe was almost totally unknown to them. Until the late 18th century, only one medical book was translated into a Middle Eastern language, a 16th century treatise on syphilis, presented to Sultan Mehmed IV in Turkish, 1655. Both the choice and the date are significant. This disease, reputedly of American origin, had come to the Islamic world from Europe, and indeed is still known in Arabic, Persian, Turkish, and other languages as the Frankish disease. Obviously, it seemed both appropriate and legitimate to adopt a Frankish remedy for a Frankish disease. Apart from that, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the technological revolution passed virtually unnoticed in the lands of Islam, where they were still inclined to dismiss the denizens of the lands beyond the western frontier as benighted barbarians, much inferior even to the more sophisticated Asian infidels to the east. These had useful skills and devices to impart. The Europeans had neither. It was a judgment that had for long been reasonably accurate. It was becoming dangerously out of date. Usually the lessons of history are most perspicuously and unequivocally taught on the battlefield, but there may be some delay before the lesson is understood and applied. In Christendom, the final defeat of the Moors in Spain in 1492 and the liberation of Russia from the rule of Islamized Tatars were understandably seen as decisive victories. Like the Spaniards and Portuguese, the Russians too pursued their former masters into their homelands, but with far greater and more enduring success. With the conquest of Astrakhan in 1554, the Russians reached the shores of the Caspian Sea. In the following century, they reached the northern shore of the Black Sea, thus beginning the long process of conquest and colonization that incorporated vast Muslim lands in the Russian Empire. But in the heartlands of Islam, these happenings on the remote frontiers of civilization seemed less important, and were in any case overshadowed in Muslim eyes by such central and vastly more important victories as the ignominious eviction of the Crusaders from the Levant in the 13th century, the capture of Constantinople in 1453, and the triumphant march of the Turkish forces through the Balkans toward the surviving Christian imperial city of Vienna in what seemed to be an irresistible advance of Islam and defeat of Christendom. The Ottoman Sultan, like his peer and rival the Holy Roman Emperor, was not without political rivals and sectarian challengers within his own religious world. Of the two, the Sultan was the more successful in dealing with these challenges. At the turn of the 15th to 16th centuries, the Ottomans had two Muslim neighbors. The older of the two was the Mamluk Sultanate of Egypt, with its capital in Cairo, ruling over all Syria and Palestine and, more important, over the holy places of Islam in western Arabia. The other was Persia, newly united by a new dynasty, with a new religious militancy. The founder of the dynasty, Shah Ismail Safavi, reigned 1501 to 1524, a Turkish-speaking Shiite from Azerbaijan, brought all the lands of Iran under a single ruler for the first time since the Arab conquest in the 7th century. A religious leader as well as, perhaps more than, a political and military ruler, he made Shi'ism the official religion of the state, and thus differentiated the Muslim realm of Iran sharply from its Sunni neighbors on both sides, to the east in Central Asia and India, and to the west in the Ottoman Empire. For a while, he and his successors, the Shahs of the Safavid line, challenged the claim of the Ottoman sultans to both political supremacy and religious leadership. The Ottoman Sultan, Selim I, known as the Grim, who reigned from 1512 to 1520, launched military campaigns against both neighbors. He achieved a substantial but incomplete success against the Shah, a total and final victory over the Mamluk Sultan of Egypt. Egypt and its dependencies were incorporated in the Ottoman realms. Persia remained a separate, rival, and, for the most part,